On the 10th of June 1940, just before the fall of France, Italy joined the war against the Allies. When Italy joined the war, Egypt and the Suez Canal were suddenly in danger, and if Suez was lost, it would threaten Britain's whole war effort. But the Italian invasion of Egypt in September 1940 only stopped at Sidi Barrani, just 65 miles across the border. After that, they began to dig in and establish fortified camps while waiting for supplies to come in. While the Italians leisurely built up their strength, the British used this time to prepare for Operation Compass, the Allies' first major land offensive of the war. During the lull, the RAF and Royal Navy harassed the Italian lines of communication and supply lines with some success. The British also kept their plans such a secret to the point that not even Winston Churchill knew about the offensive until he demanded to be told. And during the training exercises in November, only a few officers knew that the objectives marked out near Mersa Matruh were replicas of Nabewa and Tamar. Reconnaissance units managed to find a gap in the Italian minefields between the fortified camps, which were too far apart to support each other. An Italian aircrew did report that an attack was imminent at Nabewa and Maktila, but the units there were not informed. The Italian force consisted of 150,000 men, including Blackshirt and Libyan divisions, with 600 tanks and armored vehicles, 1,600 guns, and over 300 aircraft. These were under the command of Rudolfo Graziani, the Butcher of Fezzan. For the operation, the Allies had around 36,000 men with 275 tanks, 120 guns, and 142 aircraft. Officially, they were under the control of Middle East Commander Archie Wavell, but operationally they were under the command of Richard O'Connor. On paper, the Italians were stronger than the British, but a closer look reveals who had the advantage. The British tank force consisted of fast cruiser and heavier Matilda tanks equipped with 2-pounder guns that were superior to the Italian M1139s and L3 tankettes. Captured prisoners revealed that many Italian soldiers suffered from low morale, especially amongst the Libyan units who were not enthusiastic to fight a foreign power for the sake of another foreign power. Also, Mussolini was sending more men and material to Albania to fight the Greeks in the Greco-Italian War. On the 8th of December 1940, Operation Compass began. This was the Allies' first large-scale operation of the North African campaign. The offensive started with RAF attacks on Italian airfields, destroying or damaging dozens of planes on the ground. The Royal Navy then bombarded Maktila and Sidi Barrani as the ground forces got to their starting positions and began their assault. One of the first clashes began at 3 in the morning on the 9th at the Italian fortified camp of Nabewa. There, 5,000 British and Indian troops with armored support attacked the Maletti group. The Italian tanks were caught warming their engines and were quickly knocked out by the British armor. All while the infantry, supported by Brent carriers, advanced deeper into the camp. It was soon discovered that even at 30 yards, Italian field artillery was ineffective against the Matilda tanks. Isolated parties of Italian and Libyan soldiers then stalked the Allied tanks with grenades, but this was all in vain. Pietro Maletti himself was killed while firing a machine gun in his pajamas. By 11 a.m., Italian resistance was finished, and the British were able to capture a large amount of supplies and water. British armor then headed for the coast and placed themselves between Buk and Sidi Barrani, trapping many Italian soldiers in the area. The Allies then assault Tamar's west and east, and after a few hours of fighting, both fall and more prisoners are captured. Further to the north, Selby force attacks the Italian positions at Maktila, their morale breaks, and they withdraw to the west. In the south, Italian units at Safafi and Rabia, fearing another blow, fall back all the way to the Libyan border. Following up their success at the camps, the Allies moved to take Sidi Barrani. On the morning of the 10th, British forces assaulted the strongpoints held by Blackshirt units and were initially repulsed by Italian artillery fire. Fighting lasted for hours without any major gains for the British until suddenly, on the western side of the perimeter, 2 strongholds just simply surrendered. Then, under cover of a dust storm, the British launched an attack which was backed up by artillery and armor. They managed to drive 6 kilometers before the storm subsided and the infantry dismounted. Italian artillery again proved ineffective at stopping the Matildas, and gunners were overrun. On the morning of the 11th, 2,000 more Italians surrendered with only a Blackshirt Legion and the remnants of the 1st Libyan Division still fighting, but by nightfall they surrendered as well. In just 3 days, O'Connor achieved a decisive victory against the Italians with 38,000 prisoners taken, as well as a bunch of tanks, guns, and vehicles captured. This for the cost of 624 casualties for the Allies. So now the only Italian positions in Egypt were the approaches to Sollum and the area of Sidi Omar. But on the 12th came a nasty surprise. Wavell sent most of the 4th Indian Division to go fight the Italians in East Africa. They were replaced by the inexperienced 6th Australian Division, which wouldn't arrive until the 14th, giving the Italians time to reorganize. Even though O'Connor lost a significant portion of his force and only had enough supplies for a few more days of heavy fighting, his forces advanced. The 7th Armored, or Desert Rats, advanced to Tobruk where the Catanzaro division blunted their movement with heavy artillery. This is only a minor setback as the Italians are simply outflanked from both sides and are forced to withdraw. After this, the British capture Sollum, the Halfaya Pass, and Fort Capuzzo. Unfortunately, the loss in manpower gave time for the Italians to reinforce their defenses at Bardia. There, the Italians were bombarded by both air and sea until the 7th Armored cut them off from reinforcements. Seeing that there were delays in British attacks, Graziani knew that the Allies were suffering from supply difficulties despite the use of captured Italian trucks. He wanted to retreat all the way to Tobruk and mount an effective defense there, but Mussolini objected, saying that they should hold Bardia. At Bardia, the Italians were under command of General Electric Whiskers Annibale Bergonzoli, with 45,000 men surrounded by 29 kilometers of defenses with barbed wire and an anti-tank ditch. But there were some fatal flaws. First, much of the Italian artillery and artillery shells were outdated. The Italians had just a handful of M1340 tanks which had no radios, making an effective counterattack difficult. Also, if broken into, each of the Italian defensive posts could be taken down one by one. Due to Wavell's decision to send the 4th Indian Division to East Africa, the 6th Australian Division was not in a position to attack until January. The Allies would attack Bardia with 16,000 men with artillery and tank support under Ivan Mackay. On January 3, 1941, 3 battleships, the Warspite, Valiant, and Barham, along with the destroyer escorts and smaller ships, bombarded the port. Before that, the RAF flew multiple air raids with 100 sorties flown between December 31st and January 2nd. At 5:30 in the morning on January 3rd, Allied artillery opened fire and the Australians attacked Bardia from the west. Sappers blew gaps in the barbed wire with Bangalore torpedoes, then once the Australians broke in, they began taking down the Italian defenses and captured thousands of prisoners. The advance was partially impeded because men had to be diverted to guard the large numbers of prisoners taken. As the Australians moved south, they faced heavier opposition and progress slowed, with Italian artillery pinning troops to the sand. But progress was made, and on the 4th, the Aussies advanced to the port so fast that the Italians didn't have time to destroy the facilities. The battle ended on January 5th with the last areas of Italian resistance being overrun. The battle was another tremendous victory for the Allies. Over 40,000 Italian soldiers were killed, wounded, or taken prisoner, while Allied losses were less than 500. The Allies also captured 400 guns, 12 tanks, 115 L3 tankettes, and over 700 vehicles. A few thousand Italians did manage to escape either on foot or on boats, including Electric Whiskers himself. Side note, one of the Italian officers captured wore a British military cross that he earned in the First World War when Italy and Britain fought on the same side. The next objective was the port of Tobruk, and capturing it would significantly ease the supply difficulties for the Allies. Before the fall of Bardia, the Desert Rats were already on the move, and by January 5th, they advanced all the way to El Adem, just 22 kilometers south of Tobruk. They reached the coast by the 9th, cutting the port off from reinforcements. As the Australians came up, logistics once again became an issue, with the Allies having to battle sandstorms and use captured Italian trucks to bring in supplies. So the attack on Tobruk was delayed, giving time for the Italians to dig in and prepare their defenses. However, at Tobruk, things weren't much better for the Italians. First, the perimeter was almost twice as long as Bardia, and the Italians here only numbered around 20,000 men. The Italian general Enrico Patassi Manella, the king of artillerymen, tried his best to fortify the port city, but with a few obsolete tanks, old artillery guns, including captured Austrian pieces, he stood little chance. Mackay was once again in charge of the assault, and his goal was to capture the port and the facilities intact. In the early hours on January 21st, 1941, the Allies bombarded the port by both air and sea. Like at the beginning of Compass, the planes disguised the sound of Allied tanks assembling, which they now had fewer of. British artillery then opened up, and sappers blew gaps in the minefields, and within an hour, the Australians created a mile-wide breach. Matilda tanks then entered the breach as Australian troops advanced and began overrunning the Italian positions. As the Allies broke through, the Italians launched a counterattack supported by 7 M1139 tanks, but this failed. The battle for Tobruk lasted until the afternoon of the 22nd, when the final Italian strongpoint surrendered. For the battle, the Italians suffered more than 20,000 casualties, mostly POWs, and the Allies just 400. The Allies also captured 208 guns, 87 tanks, and the port facilities with only minor damages, which was fully operational by the 24th. Also captured was 10,000 tons of water, a power station, along with refrigeration and distillation works. So now the Allies have a major port and supply base west of Alexandria. Trying to follow up their success after Tobruk, the Allies kept on the move. On the 24th of January, the 7th Armored confronted the Babini Group north of Mihili, with both sides losing several tanks. Then, on the 25th, the Australians attacked the Sabratha Division and the 10th Bersaglieri at Derna. This failed as the Bersaglieri were able to sweep the flat ground with machine gun and artillery fire, while Italian planes flew sorties against the Australians. The Italians then began to disengage on the night of the 28th to avoid being trapped. As they withdrew, the Babini Group delayed the British by cratering roads, laying mines, planting booby traps, and launching skillful ambushes. The Italians retreated into the Jebel Akhdar, and with high mountains, regular rainfall, and forests, the Italians could, in theory, hold out for months. But rather than attack the Italians at the Jebel, O'Connor planned to move across the desert towards Massus, completely bypassing them. All while the Australians, minus a brigade, would pursue the Italians along the coast. All he needed was the 2nd Armored Division, which would arrive February 9th, and enough time to stockpile supplies. But on February 2nd, the Italians began to withdraw, forcing O'Connor into a dilemma. Should he wait for his reinforcements and supplies, or go through with his plan with what he had on hand? He chose the latter. O'Connor orders Michael O'More Cray to drive the 7th Armored through the desert until he either cuts off the Italians or his division falls apart in the desert. A supply column would follow them for 2 days, but after that they were on their own. They began on February 4th and made good time across the open desert despite not doing any reconnaissance of the region. By the 5th, most of the division was near Massus, and to the north the Australians were pressing towards Benghazi, which fell on the 6th. After reaching Massus, a column of wheeled vehicles was created called the Combe Force, named after Lieutenant Colonel John Combe. Their objective was to head for Antalat and then southwest to the coast to cut off the Italian retreat. By the afternoon of the 5th, Combe Force established themselves on the coast near Beit Falm and engaged the retreating Italians. The Italians tried desperately to break through the roadblock, but with British reinforcements arriving and the Australians coming from the north, the Italians soon surrendered. Among those captured was General Electric Whiskers Annibale Bergonzoli. At Beit Falm alone, the Allies capture another 25,000 prisoners. O'Connor then sends an uncoded message to Theater Commander Archie Wavell to purposely anger Benito Mussolini. Fox killed in the open. The Allies then advanced a bit further until they reached El Agheila, but that was not the end of Operation Compass. Further south, there were Italian positions that would hold out for weeks after Beit Falm. At the oasis of Kufra, the Italian garrison held out from the end of January until the Free French captured it on March 1st. And the siege of Gyarabub would last from the 25th of December until March 21st, over 80 days. Overall, the operation was a total success for the Allies. What began as a simple raid turned into a major defeat for the Italians. Italian casualties were nearly 150,000, mostly POWs, along with 420 tanks, 845 guns, and 564 aircraft lost. Meanwhile, the Allies suffered less than 2,000 total casualties. O'Connor wanted to continue and take all of Libya, but there were a couple of complications. First, after traveling hundreds of kilometers across the desert, the Allied vehicle and tank force was in a dire state. The RAF may have only lost 26 planes, but many more were damaged and could not be repaired for lack of spare parts. Perhaps more impactful was the British decision to send reinforcements to Greece and to hold Cyrenaica with the bare minimum of forces. Ivan Mackay's 6th Australian Division would be sent to Greece, and the Desert Rats would be sent to Cairo for refit and repair. So no matter how much O'Connor wanted to push into Tripolitania, his forces physically could not. Meanwhile, German forces began arriving in Tripoli, and they would be called the Deutsches Afrika Korps, and it would be led by General Erwin Rommel. Rommel was under strict orders to just hold Tripolitania, and the Allies knew this from intercepted Enigma messages. With this information, they were confident they wouldn't have to worry about an Axis attack in North Africa for months. But Rommel wanted to attack, and before leaving for North Africa, he was encouraged by Hitler himself to go on the offensive. If you want to learn about another African offensive, check out my video on the Togoland campaign of 1914. Thank you for watching, like, comment, and hit subscribe.